Zach Servideo here from Boston Speaks Up. I'm here with Chris Cardoza, the founder and CEO of Doza Visuals, also known as the Bulldoza, if you've ever hired him for some creative work in town. Chris Cardoza, it's good to talk to you. That'll probably be the last time I call you Chris or Cardoza on this call. I'll probably just go with Doza the rest of the way. For listeners that don't know you yet, that haven't had the privilege, can you just share with folks like what you're up to with Doza Visuals and some of the work?
Yeah, sure.
You do?
First of all, Zach, you have such a calming voice. And when I started listening to your Speaks Up episodes, you know, sometimes I start to doze off just because it's calming. Very informative, but calming. Yeah. But yeah, so I started Doza Visuals about actually 10 years ago this week. I was a video production temp at the time at Reebok. I had pretty quick little story about that. I had applied for that position back in college at UMass Amherst, and I had no editing experience, no really video experience at all, but I was like, this would be really cool. I want to go work with athletes. And I showed up to the meeting and they were like, all right, cool. Like, what can you edit for us? And I was like, nothing. So after that, I didn't get the job, obviously. And then after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to edit. So I learned how to edit, got this, reapplied for that job after college, and I landed it. And that launched my career. And ever since then, after that 1 year stint at Reebok, I've been producing, shooting, editing, directing, and photographing people in an authentic format for brands such as Reebok, TB12 Sports, the ICA in Boston, all sorts of brands and companies. And I've been traveling the world at the same time. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a pretty crazy career.
That's really cool. So in some ways, Reebok kind of helped launch your career.
It's insane. You know, I'm sure a lot of people listening have worked at large brands or even like just creative brands like Reebok in general. The network you build at a company like that just lasts forever. You know, what's the phrase? Is it 3 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon? Once I started working at Reebok, I think it became 2 degrees to literally anybody in the world. So I could message somebody and just be like, hey, do you know so-and-so? You know, I'm about to work with this athlete. And they're like, yeah, I know his manager, or I know. And and then everybody at Reebok, you know, everybody leaves their job eventually. And at this point in life, I think, you know, career spans at one company is only like 3 years tops. So, you know, if I made some really great relationships there, and when people started going to other companies, that really blossomed to new work. And over 10 years, it's really, really worked out. But for a few years, Reebok was really my only client, and that was really terrifying and exciting at the same time.
It's interesting. The freelancers in the modern age, like 2023, it's crazy. We're in 2023 now. I really would say solo entrepreneurs have a real benefit to that point you just made about how folks don't stay at companies for 3 years might even be an overestimate, right? Because we're not our parents' generation. Like you're also a millennial, right?
I am.
Yeah. So we're millennials, and
proud millennial.
Yeah. Proud millennials here. And, which is, I was thinking about the other day, like I'm on that, like maybe slightly older. I don't know but where the millennials, generally speaking, like kind of had like part of their childhood and like adolescence was in the 90s, but then also like we were going to like high school in the early 2000s, but then also like started our careers at the end of the 2000s. And I don't know, it's a interesting sort of maybe worth picking up on that thread too. But the thread I wanted to double click on is your sort of point about all the cascading network and how it actually is for young people. It's advantageous, and I guess the environment is more advantageous for folks to be entrepreneurs, be consultants, be freelancers, however they want to view and position themselves, because the network you have in any given year, 2-3 year stretch is going to move around and work at different companies. Whether they choose to be freelancers or not, people are going to move. If they choose to be full-time job to full-time job to full-time job. They're going to work different full-time jobs. And without, they will remain nameless, but my silent partner who introduced us met you at Reebok. So it's like just tying that thread back to like why we're on today and why I've been able to connect deeply with you over the last couple of years, hire you, be grateful to work with you on some really cool video sizzles for some hot tech companies. At least in our case, you've worked for some pretty big, cool name brands. And I tend to work with some name brands and then also some nerdy tech companies. I think a lot of folks will know Axelar, which is a Web3 infrastructure interoperability platform. Big player, a lot of money behind that group. And my pal Galen Moore, former editor-in-chief of American Inno, is over there. And he was like, hey, I got this amazing CEO. He's able to describe like the most complicated things in Web3, like to in layman speak. And I need to capture that. And I need to be able to speak vis-a-vis investors, vis-a-vis the employees, and sort of like vis-a-vis the market. And, working with you on a video like that and meeting some of the team that you have behind you and the folks that you bring in, like Harry Scales, it really it reopened my eyes back to like what an amazing creative community exists in Boston that's sort of like hiding in plain sight, if you will. And so, yeah, just like, I'm curious just if you want to double click on that a little bit. And I know I'm going a little out of order from like the pre-podcast Q&A we were doing to kind of just align, but I'd love for like we have people's attention early in this podcast. They got a grounding like, oh wow, Doza, like he came up through Reebok. He worked TB12 Sports, like cool. In a little bit, we'll talk about your trip to Rwanda with the GOAT, the greatest of all time, Boston sports reporter, Jackie MacMullan. Talk to me though about the creative community in Boston and its relationship with like the business community and what you feel like and what you feel like that relationship is and how you hope that relationship sort of evolves.
Yeah, from what I see at companies in Boston, there's this riff internally at all these companies. Boston's such an academic, data-driven, but still old school city when it comes to really just mindset in general. My favorite thing about Boston is that we're a small town. Everybody calls it a town, but you can't go anywhere around the world that Boston hasn't affected. So Boston's still stuck a little bit in that academic mindset, but we're starting to evolve into storytelling more, and people want to do it. But I think I'm just hearing, people still don't see the value in it, where you might see the value in New York or LA more because it's just more common. But Boston's loaded with creatives. If you watch any Hollywood film, any comedy, people are coming out of Boston. It's just, you're talking about Dane Cook, Chris Evans, so many celebrities are coming out of Boston, but we still have so many right here. And I see it in my world. But the most beautiful part of Boston, it's really tight knit. So I'll be walking into a shoot at Reebok and I'll run into the same 4 photographers every time. And everybody's working at the same companies. And it's really, really close. But I think it's time for Boston to start accepting that we have way more creatives than we think. And we need to use those people more. But they don't need to be going to New York or LA. They can stay right here.
No, that's well said. And another way to put an end cap on that. And we have way more stories to tell, because there's a little bit of like the same companies are investing in the same storytelling with the same people. And there's, if we just go by the simple 80-20 rule, like 20% of the market is embracing really like just appropriately modern visual storytelling. And then 80% of the market is still like, and you need traditional anchor marketing content, ebooks, white papers, whatever you want, however you want to refer to it, written analytical content. But you also need to engage people and have a visual identity and a way to visually express and connect to people so that folks want to work for you, work with you, and invest in you. And I definitely do see that trend changing. I'd say more broadly speaking, like the types of companies that the Value Creation Labs has started to work with the last couple of years on like big digital transformation and brand identity projects are backed by private equity. The board of directors is heavily involved in the decision, and there's a consensus that brand and visual identity is really important. So
Yeah,
I think the tide's shifting for sure.
Everybody wants to do it. I think there has to be a mindset change in the city at the very top, you know, the CEOs who are signing off on all these budgets. Because let's be honest, in 2023, after what we've learned after the pandemic, there's no better way to scale your business right now than great storytelling through content, especially short form content right now on TikTok and Reels. You know, you and I have these conversations all the time. I think companies are starting to learn, you know, yes, they have to have great products and services, but they also have to become their own media brands as well and publish their own content. Now, this has been going on for a while, I think, but the pandemic forced everybody to really look internally, like, are we doing this properly? Are we doing this enough? And frankly, I don't think anybody's doing it enough. I think everybody needs to be. Now, I'm biased because I'd be the one making it, but it's just the truth that there's no better way to scale your company right now than content.
Mm-hmm. Well, just staying on this topic a little longer too, since we're in this area of our discussion, and without getting into pricing and specifics, I think that's like also a bit of my push and plea on some of the creative community. Not you, because you're very reasonable and fair in the way that you price and you look at things, but you just hit on it. Like, you think in a very like modern storytelling way. Like, you were spinning my head around a month or so ago, and we were talking about catching up for 2023, and you're talking about this sort of like Reels, TikTok Reels approach to creating derivative content off of more, you know, premium captured, like, you know, video that you're working, and then in your post-production lab, you're really thinking about TikTok, you're thinking about Instagram, et cetera. You're thinking about asset packages that can sort of layer out quarter over quarter and give companies like a steady drumbeat, you know, a public pulse, if you will, et cetera. And I look at some of the notable companies, or I should say, like, you know, film companies, video production studios in Boston. And, I mean, some of the prices are like 20, 30, and I've done the math in my head, like 50x what it should be. And there's some really, and so I think, you know, some notable companies in the market have also like kind of just over indexed on these like big fat, like $250,000, $500,000, you know, projects to produce videos for, you know, the sliver, you know, top 1% of like banks that can afford to like invest in those commercial videos. Spoiler alert, they aren't in 2023.
Right.
And, you know, people can read the tea leaves on that if they listen to the switch up of the sponsorship or lack thereof at the top of this podcast. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But the days are numbered for like, oh yeah, we're going to shoot a commercial video for you. We're going to charge $350,000 for it. Okay. Interesting. Well, my counter to that is I have $180,000 budget for all of my marketing this year. And I'm looking to do video, you know, maybe video can fit in for $50,000, but I also need a marketing strategy against that video post-production content so that it can feed my marketing systems so that I have things to market to the world for the year. And, you know, where I do think Boston's film production community falls short is that they do take a little bit of a old school approach to production costs. And I would say like a lot of like weight, a lot of fat, a lot of excess. I'm curious your comments on that, because I do, because word gets out about that, and then that's why they go and they find and companies in Boston dismiss local, or they dismiss video, or they go to other cities. And I think there's a little, so I wouldn't put it all on like CEOs need to make decisions and embrace things, but they may be hearing about the exorbitant costs of the few notable video production firms in Boston, and they're just like, well, it's not even, it's like a non-starter. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a decent investment, and I think it's super important investment. But the days of needing a crew of like 20 people on set with, oh God, RVs and trailers, it's so unnecessary at this point. There's places for it, but like, there's no reason to do it. The equipment now in video, your iPhone's shooting almost as good video as some of the best cameras you're going to see on that set. And the amount of people like myself who are capable of shooting really, really high quality video that's going to look just as good as these $100,000 budget videos with crews that exist in Boston and New England, it's only growing every day. It's, every kid coming out of college wants to do this now, or they want to be a YouTuber. So the way I've always approached it, just because I've kind of been repulsed by these large scale productions, is I like to look at everything from a documentary filmmaker lens. And that's kind of where I, originated. And that's some of the courses I took at UMass is really where I became obsessed with it. And I think it's become insanely valuable for 2023 because a documentary filmmaking style is typically a small footprint, right? It's like myself and maybe two other people. It's the client, an assistant here, an audio guy maybe. And you're doing these interviews and you're really getting to know your subject over a long period of time. And I mean long period, it could just be 2 days, but I'm a millennial, so that feels long now. But you're capturing more intimate, emotional stories, but at the same time, you're able to record these long interviews, and then maybe you're making a 2-minute piece, 3-minute piece out of that, but you're also able to catalog that long interview. You transcribe it, use it for blogs, and then you chop up the long interview for Instagram Reels and TikTok into hundreds of assets if you really wanted to. So I just think the value of these smaller creatives, these one-off creatives, is much higher than hiring these larger agencies who are just going to bloat it. Now, there's always a place for that. They're shooting Super Bowl ads if you want to just look at, but half the time that's just like, so that you say you did this for your company. It's kind of like awards, right? It's like winning an award at Cannes. It means nothing for your brand. It's just that you said you won an award so that you can tell your pals, at the bar later that you won an award. Don't get me wrong. I like awards and I have awards for my photography and stuff. And it might help in a meeting, but it all comes down to just like intimate quality storytelling. And in this day and age with the equipment that's cheap and the amount of people who know how to do this now, and every kid coming out of college knows how to do this now, I don't see why there's any barrier to entry for any company to start creating video content.
Yeah, that's well said. And I love you mentioned Super Bowl, because this podcast will come out around the Super Bowl. And as someone who's worked at the intersection of media and technology with a lot of advertising, technology, measurement companies over the years, I've been part of Super Bowl ad measurement command centers on Super Sunday, and like worked the Super Bowl and like dished out data to reporters that are quantifying like the attention around the Super Bowl ads, right? Because it's the time in the year where the TV ads are most center stage. There's no other time like it, right? But I am so happy that 2023 is the year of performance. It was the theme at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show that kicks off the year across industries. Like everyone is kind of getting hip to the entrepreneurial mindset. And I think the way you describe how you're thinking about transcribing the content, and maybe the ultimate output's 2-3 minutes, but you're transcribing it in the blog post and derivatives, like that's how a business owner thinks. And it's taking the move that I suspect needs to happen and will more easily happen at the more boutique, smaller agency level is an embrace of like more partnership approach. We're sitting at the table to C-suite. We're like thinking like a business owner, and it's how can we extract the most value out of a production? And so it needs to be less about, oh, we're a vendor and we have a process and we produce this grandiose output. Spending $5 million on a Super Bowl ad, yeah, like math wise, like maybe then all of a sudden it's like, oh, spending 300, 400, 500 grand on the creative. Oh, that makes sense. I'm spending 5 million just on a placement during the Super Bowl, and then that's my ad campaign for the year. But what's the return on that investment, right? What's the strategy behind that? And those are the kind of stories I'm interested in reading this year in Digiday, Advertising Age, Ad Week. Like I'm curious to see sort of like, what are the cool, sexy, viral ads that air, or don't get to the 84 lumber ads of this year, like whatever those stories are going to be. But I'm really kind of curious of like what creative agencies have stepped up and have partnered and taken less of a vendor approach to the Super Bowl ad production, and the Super Bowl ad is the launch of some long go-to-market strategy that simply started day one was the Super Bowl. And so I think, does it make sense to spend $5 million on a Super Bowl ad? That's a lot of money. But it might make sense if you're kicking off and you're launching this deliberate program of content and storytelling over time. And to your point about documentary filmmaking, now I'm really going off on a riff. If you start thinking about like every brand is a media publisher, is a storyteller, like every brand think like a TV program or like a network. All right, $5 million Super Bowl ad is just the way you're launching your media IP in the world. I mean, look at gaming and toy companies that launch shows that are popular on YouTube, and they become media companies, and they get so good at their media storytelling and their programming that they actually create inventory and a whole new monetization against their content before they even go and sell more dolls, which is like a really viable model in the toy and gaming industry right now. And I think that, that I commend the agencies that sort of take that approach. But I think it's still few and far between. And I'm curious if that, how much that resonates with you.
Yeah, no, I think I get frustrated when there's projects and you find out it's just, we shot something, it's awesome, and that was it. Like, okay, you threw the video up on YouTube, or in a much grander scale, you threw it up on a Super Bowl ad, which, excuse me, probably is worth it, right? The value of the eyeballs on a Super Bowl ad is insane. But you have all this, right? It probably goes back to my days at Reebok. When I was a temp, they would throw me in their video archives, and I would just sit there all day digitizing. And we started, okay, we have all this. Why not keep using it? Like, there's so many ways to use it. And same deal with anything shot these days needs to be cataloged, metadata in there so that you can quickly find it and still recycle it throughout, the next 10 years. Because there's so many outlets for video, especially right now, and stills, like TikTok and Reels or YouTube Shorts. You got to have somebody who's just constantly going through that and creating new assets. And that somebody can be internally, or somebody is someone like me. Like you said, I've been starting programs I call content partnerships, rather than doing one-off projects with brands. I come to them and say, hey, why don't we do this over a long period of time, like 6 months to a year? We'll do a shoot every month. Here's the package. And I'm consistently cutting out short form content out of that long form day. So we might make a 2 to 3 minute piece every month, but we're producing 15 assets out of that. And if you're shooting a Super Bowl ad, you're going to have so much footage, so many assets that you can repurpose. And all you have to do is just make sure you have the rights to that, and then hire an editor, and editor can just let the editor go crazy. And there's nothing more fun than going through someone's content library and creating new, fun storytelling pieces for them.
Spoken from a place of being a true post-production nerd that you are.
True.
I think a lot like a lot of creatives like that. I mean, as more of a writer storyteller, like I love like mining through like old brand guides and company manifestos and pitch documents, and like kind of absorbing a lot of things and synthesizing it into like new and fresh stories. So I totally relate to you as more like the post-production, written storyteller in me.
One of my, just to tell you a quick story, one of my favorite projects I did once was, so I was kind of one of the people who would follow JJ Watt around for Reebok for years. They signed him, probably like 6 years ago, and said they're going to start making him a shoe, which was really cool. He made this really cool trainer, and they'd send me out to just film really like social content with them and videos. And after a while, somebody messaged me from Reebok and was like, hey, like, can we just, if we dump off tons of footage to you, we're talking designer text messages to him, sketches that nobody's seen, can you just make something out of it? And we created an awesome video. You can probably find it on YouTube somewhere. It's like the making of JJ Watt's shoes. And that, to me, that's so fun to just get dumped content and say, create something out of it. It's kind of like, I don't know, for me, the editing platform is my canvas, and seeing all that data and footage, I can start forming a story out of it. It's really exciting.
Are we ready for a fun public challenge?
Yeah.
that I'll share here on the podcast, and then folks will be able to listen and then like go and seek it out. So I think for listeners, one of the exciting things about doing this podcast together is sort of what you just hit on, which is at the end of this, we're using Riverside FM for the first time, which is a new tool for me, but a tool you use a lot. Use it with TB12 Sports, et cetera, those clients you mentioned. And at the end of this, we'll have audio, but we're also going to have video. And I'm excited for you to have sort of like the raw material, the Boston Speaks Up branded assets, like the Doza Visuals Value Creation Lab, sort of like logos, assets, and just like coalesced visions that we sort of share on things. And hey, challenge, it sounds like challenge accepted for you coming up with some like exciting ways to create content from this big canvas that we'll have at the end of this discussion. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with.
Yeah, the only weird part is I have to look at myself and listen to myself. Like, God, what a hell. But no, it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Well, at least you get my soothing ASMR.
That's right.
Voice.
That's right. You might keep putting me to sleep, which I need sleep right now, Zach. I need sleep.
There you go. You know what? We're gonna have to get into that actually.
Sure.
Well, so let's go back. Let's unpack a little bit on the personal side, because the entrepreneur that you are, it started at an early age, and talk about growing up in Easton, Mass. Talk about the family business a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Easton, Massachusetts, about 40 minutes south of Boston. I'm the third or fourth generation off the boat and in Easton, and guess what? I'm back in Easton, which I never thought I would say, but I am. I grew up here, and my family owned a pizza shop. We owned a pizza shop down in Fall River, and from the age...
What was it called?
It was called Pizza Etc. There's actually a Pizza Etc. in Brighton, which I drive by every day, which is really funny to see. But, so I grew up with entrepreneurship ingrained in my blood in the most basic sense. The most, I don't know what the right word is, but natural entrepreneur is your small business, family owned business. I mean, that's the American dream in general too. So from age 5 until I think it was around 17, we worked there almost every day, the five of us in my family. I was making boxes, folding boxes in the back. My parents would pay me a nickel a box. I was probably 5 or 6 years old doing that with my sister, having competitions. And then eventually we, evolved to, I was actually on the pizza line making pizzas probably by age 10. I think our record was 150 pizzas in one day for BFI because they had a headquarters nearby.
Nice.
And then at the same time, my brother, who was older than me, was basically writing up proposals for them because they did a lot of corporate catering. And, he was only 12 years old writing proposals, which is unbelievable.
Wow.
Unbelievable. And to this day.
Were you in the middle? Like, so your brother was 12, you were 10, like,
yeah, exactly. There's 3 years from my brother, and I'm 2 years older than my sister.
Okay.
So we just had a really fascinating life, living really two different lives. We were living in Fall River, which is, socioeconomically a lower economic demographic than Easton, Mass, which is pretty high middle class or whatever. And so we saw both worlds, which was really good for my childhood. And it really, taught me how to just interact with every type of person you could think of. Some of my best friends at the pizza shop were the drivers, right? And we would hang out in the back while they were waiting for their next call and, wrestling and stuff, like just being chaotic. But we really just had an awesome upbringing in that sense, and really, really close family. And to this day, we're super close. And one of the coolest outcomes of that is my entire family, we all own our own businesses. So I own Doza Visuals. My sister owns a company called Wagging Tails, which is a doggy daycare, like full service. She owns 7 vans. They pick up your dog, they feed your dog, they bring them back in the afternoon. And that's in Easton and serves all the towns around. And then my brother owns a company called RevT, which is an IT AV company. And he installs conference room TVs for like huge companies and large fancy universities. And he's based out of Canton. And then my father has a insurance business. So we're all still doing it. I think my mom's terrified every day because of that, because the uncertainties of working for yourself. And we saw that growing up. There was a recession after 9/11, like a little recession, and that really hurt our pizza shop. And, our family went from being very comfortable, probably middle to upper middle class to, frankly, almost losing our house and stuff like that. And that was pretty traumatic on being a child going through that. And since we were so heavily involved in the pizza shop, we all kind of understood what was going on. We were there every day, but we learned, and, we saw my parents' resilience through that, which was unbelievable. In those moments, that really shows who you are. And that's why, to this day, my parents are my heroes for sure. And they just, started over. They had to sell the shop, and my father was like, I don't know what to do. And he started a new business. He learned something completely from scratch. And I think that's the most heroic, incredible thing someone can do, especially middle-aged. I think he was in his late 40s or maybe 50s when he did it, which is unbelievable. So that's a long story short, but nice. I wouldn't change anything in my childhood and my upbringing for anything.
That's really cool. And jump cut to the last few minutes and share that with your family, and especially the last 30 seconds with your father and your mother. Like the two of them, the way that they're your sort of heroes. And like we even talked about this pre-podcast, like sort of like who your role models growing up. It's like easy answer for you. It's your parents.
Yeah, it's funny. I can see behind my computer. So we're probably going to talk about this, but we just had twins, and my twins are almost 7 months old, and I can see my mom holding my daughter Quinn right now, and it is the most beautiful sight you'll see. There's nothing better than watching your parents hold and take care of your children.
Yeah.
And them becoming grandparents is the greatest thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good, like, let's go there next. Like, talk about, so you had twins, and it's interesting. Like, I particularly thought it was interesting how you, when asking you about sort of juggling, running your own business with being a new parent to twins, talk the good, the bad, and the difficult, and talk about sort of the context switching between like CEO, business owner, and like chief assistant to your wife.
Yeah.
What's that been like? But ultimately being, owning your own business, I think has given you a lot of flexibility to create new schedules and new habits to be present in all places, as challenging as that can be at times.
Yeah. I mean, listen, anybody who has had kids, it's the most beautiful thing you could ever experience. I knew I was going to be in love with these kids, but not to this level. I couldn't be more in love, and sometimes like addicted to hanging out with them, which is hard when you do need to get back to work. So it's the most beautiful thing, but it's the hardest thing by far we've ever done. And if there's any parents listening who have our parents of multiples, and it's a tight community, thank God. But it's just a different animal. Luckily, being self-employed, I make my own schedule. I work whenever I can or want. Obviously, the more I work, the more money I make. But that also means if I prepared myself for properly and saved properly, then I could take some more time off than your average person who works a 9 to 5. And that was the most valuable thing I could ever, ask for. Essentially over the last 6 months, I've been working and still there's still revenue and everything coming through, but it feels very different. I'm working at nights when they're sleeping, but I'm there for them a lot during the day, but one of the coolest things is once we had to make a decision. My wife is an occupational therapist in an elementary school. And once we had to make a decision, we have twins. Is this even, what do we want to do? Does one of us want to stay home? And she wanted to stay home because, it's your kids and it's awesome. So, and we had that opportunity to do that. And as I still feel really young and immature with business and life. It's terrifying to become the sole income of your family, especially now that I'm responsible for 2 more human beings, which is crazy. Yeah. But at the same time, it drove me from a business standpoint and creatively, like way further than I ever expected. I guess I really needed that push. So at this point, it's really, I told you about it. It feels like, during the day when I'm helping out a little bit, but not as much, I'm totally in control of the Doza visuals world. I'm the CEO. I'm creatively, I'm watching movies, just getting ideas and doing my thing, listening to music, just so I'm always ready and fresh with new ideas for the next project. And then, for lunch, I might snap out and hear a crying baby and help Katie and whoever's also helping us for that day. And then it's like, Katie, what do you need? She's in charge. Like her assistant or VP, we really are trying to split it a lot, but at this point it has to become more her and I have to work more. So the balance is just crazy. And, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. I think this is my life moving forward, and you're becoming a parent for the second time too. And there's this split mental state that's so hard to deal with when you have 2 and there's issues with both of them or happiness with both of them. And you do have to choose, it's emotionally draining. It's, it comes down to, it started the day of the C-section for the twins. They pulled them out and they put them in 2 corners of the room and there's teams on each one. And my wife's cut open and you don't know what's going on. This is my first time. And then the doctor's like, okay, we're going to take one to the NICU. We're going to take the other one out. Who do you want to go with? Do you want to stay with mom? And immediately you're just like, how do you make that decision? And that kind of feels like life now. Like, how do you make those decisions on where you need to be with your time? Because now time is so valuable and there's way less of it. But in the grand scheme, it's really pushed me further to just be a better person, be a better business person. And really, it's been really cool to just be able to be there so much for them and my wife in particular. Yeah. That was a lot of different things, but I hope that answered your question.
Well, it did. And I mean, I wrote down, I was looking at your kind of answer on this topic pre-podcast, and I just wrote down like new superpowers.
Yeah. And
like you basically get new superpowers.
You do. And you probably hear it in my voice. I'm still like going through it. It's super emotional. Yeah. And I'm an emotional dude. You know, I'm an artist at heart. It's emotional. And the whole experience is just shocking. You know, this is our first kids, so it's just a lot at once. And look, you know, you're as a new parent, you're learning everything, and everything's doubled for us. So it's a lot. It's a lot. It's wild, but it's euphoric at the same time. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you kind of touched on, which kind of gets us back to that narrative we're at, where like from 5 to 17, you work at Pizza Etc. You know, you're part of the family business. You got that little recession after the, .com burst of the early 2000s. So then you go out, like you're making your way you end up going to UMass, and I want to kind of pick up on that, but I also want to like double click on the types of habits that you developed as an adolescent, as a teenager, on the sports front, on the health and fitness front, because, when you were talking about the context switching between like being a business owner and being a dad, for me, my approach to that and the challenge in there is like, if I didn't get a chance to all day to do something for myself, like jump on the Peloton, go for a walk, or go to the gym and work on my recovering, Achilles surgery from last year, I make a point at the end, towards the end of the day, if like my daughter's home, I'll dip and tuck down, I'll slide downstairs in the home gym, and I'll do like a really quick 10-minute workout, and I'll do something for myself, but I'll also just there's something it helps me mentally shift, breathe, kind of feel good, kind of reset a little bit. And then go be really present and sit down with we sit down just about every night and have dinner together. And I usually make dinner. I make dinner in our family. So I think that, and so kind of relating your childhood and how much sports were important to you. And I'd be curious if that's some of the stuff, you mentioned, pre-podcast, the importance of health and fitness, even today, to kind of work through it all. I'd love to hear a little bit about those tips and tricks now that are working for you, but then it'd be cool to talk about where that all started as an athlete. And I think, and then we can talk a little bit about baseball, because you put it really well. I played all sorts of sports growing up, and I hadn't thought of it this way, but you fail the most in baseball.
By far. Yeah.
So you were a baseball player in particular. And I think, learning how to fail, but learning the value in competition, getting up, going, and the value in pushing yourself, increasing your heart rate, getting, doing something for your physical well-being is really important to having the overall happiness quotient that you need to thrive in life.
Yeah. Listen, the greatest thing I ever discovered was running. And I'm terrible at it. But when I was in high school, for some reason, I think a friend of mine I joined the cross country team, and, I'm definitely an ADD kid, and putting me in the woods, consistently active, just cleared my head on a daily basis, made me healthier, gave me some social interactions, because, we'd go for these long jogs, and, our coach would tell us, do a talking pace today, and it's the best. You talk for an hour, and I love to talk, as you could probably tell. Mm-hmm. And that has carried over my entire life since, even though it's my worst sport by far, but it's my favorite by far. Running to me is just it's meditation. It's my time, but specifically running in the woods. There's nothing, I don't know what it's doing to my brain. I don't know what, I feel I feel like I just took drugs every time I do it. And I feel like I need to do it.
I get it.
I need to do it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right now, I haven't been able to get back into it. And I'm trying to find that time, and I think it's coming. And that's what I'm looking forward to most as we settle into having babies. But going back to baseball, from a very, very early age, I think I was 5, I became just absolutely obsessed with the game of baseball, to a point where every single Red Sox game, I would stand in my living room with a bat. And this is one of the coolest things about my parents. They let me do this. And I would swing every time there was a pitch. So I would swing
either side
super hard. And then I developed a really hard swing, and from an early age, I was probably hitting the ball harder than most kids. Quick little story. And this was awful, but, I was playing pretty competitive summer ball. I think I was like, I was like 12 years old. But I had developed, using my hips in baseball quicker than other kids, so I could hit really hard line drives. And this poor pitcher on the other team had just got back. It was his first time pitching since breaking his arm. And I drove a line drive right at his arm and re-broke his arm. It's awful. But I swear to God, I think I hit that ball 90 miles an hour at the time. And it was just, but I don't know where I was going with that, but it was just, became obsessed with the game. And became very stubborn. So when everybody was like, what are you going to do when you grow up? I was like, I'm going to play baseball. I'm going to play baseball. I'm going to play baseball.
Well, that's where I wanted to go with this too, is like, you wanted to play baseball, you want to play baseball. And then I'm curious, like, when the switch flipped and the reality check came in, all right, maybe baseball's a tough path.
Yeah.
They got all these tiers of minor leagues, etc. I don't even know if I could play in college, all that. And at what point did you realize, well, I'm creative, and photo video became an interesting, maybe initial like hobby and interest?
Yeah, I had always been creative. I liked poetry. I'd write poetry when I was really kind of down. And I loved music. Music's always been a massive part of my life, just as a hobby, listening to it. But about the end of high school, senior year, I had played so much baseball, every season, and I started to get really burnt out. But coincidentally, that year was my best baseball year in terms of team. We won the state championship at Oliver Ames High School. And the year before that, I had torn my PCL running track in the winter. So I had just transitioned from my favorite position, which was catcher, and to outfield. And the transition actually worked really well. But by the end of that tournament season, when we finally won, I was kind of like, I think I'm just done. My body was messed from catching. My knees are they pop every single time I bend down with my kids, they pop. And I was like, I'm just going to go to college and figure something new out. And soon enough in college, I was invited to work on my cousin's movie set in New York. He was doing a personal project at the time, and I was just a PA, and I absolutely loved it. And after that, I started taking classes, and I started writing and screenwriting, and I just became obsessed with it in the same way I became obsessed with baseball. But luckily, it's a more sustainable obsession and not as hard on the body.
Nice. That's cool. So you go to UMass for 4 years. What was your major?
Oh, I started out chemistry with the intention of joining the pre-med track. And it went from chemistry to walking out of a physics class, basically saying, fuck this. I'm not doing this anymore. Going to a counselor and then just being like, hey, I really liked being on set. Like, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, you should go into communications. And so I studied communications, which at a school like UMass is pretty much where they put all the athletes. And, it's an awesome major, but it's very broad, and you really have to be self-motivated to find weird little niche within the large, broad major. And I did. I found video, I found filmmaking, and screenwriting in particular became my passion at that point.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, that's the gift and the curse of liberal arts. Like I would say, more gift than curse because you can dabble in a bunch of things and you can pivot a bit and then you can make the most of it of what you want. You can kind of double click into a concentration or two.
Zach, what did you study?
Yeah. I went to Boston University for communications. So I was pretty certain that I wanted to go into comms. So then I just looked only at schools that had comms programs that seemed to be very like good, but had a range. So even even at BU, it was liberal arts education. So I was able to do I did multiple concentrations outside of comms. Like I did one on Soviet politics.
Whoa.
Which I'm fascinated with history. I did a concentration on US history. And then in communications, I initially was concentrating on advertising within, and I did actually ultimately, my degree was in advertising and comms, but I actually took just as many journalism and public relations courses as I did advertising courses. Like I kind of hedged my bets and took a few, the thing that I took advantage of because I had solid grant money going, but was incurring some debt and like needed to be in the best position possible to make money after. So, there's like extra credits to use when you're paying for college. Like at BU, there was always like 2 or 4 more credits that you didn't have to take and you could still like, satisfy that year. And I just always maxed out my credits and took like an extra class. So I did a lot of extra classes and was able to like, I ended up going the public relations, like earned route in sort of communications. But I had just as much an education in advertising. So it makes sense that a lot of my communications abilities, like I deployed them for like advertising technology companies during that like ad tech wave of the late 2000s, like 2010s. So that's
amazing. I had no idea about your history passion. That's so cool.
I'm a nerd. I have my wife watching Vikings Valhalla right now.
Yes, I love it.
Because there's enough historical accuracy and figures from history that just has me like living on. Like I'm a guy that watches sports and like frequently visits Wikipedia because I want to know the backstory. I mean, it's like, should this be a surprise? Like being the founder of Boston Speaks Up, but I love the backstory behind people. And I love like I love individuals, like history. I like talking to you about, it's cool to hear about, that, your high school team winning a state championship, like fascinates me. I want to like look that up after and like see who you played against and stuff. But yeah, it's just something in me that I find interesting. Sort of like, I think it's really interesting to learn about people's past, cultures past, societies past. And like the US history classes I took, like the history department at BU was really special. Like there was a course, the entire semester was just US history from 1945 to 1968. And then there was a class that picked up at 68 to present. And like, there were just like multiple weeks focused on like the Monterey Pop Festival, which was like kind of the pre-Woodstock. And so like there was like it was a lot of like how pop culture coalesced with politics, and it's really interesting. And I still to this day I draw on a lot of lessons. I probably draw on the most lessons of like from the past to kind of inform how I hypothesize where the puck is going in the kind of present future.
Do you have an era that you're really, really obsessed with, or your favorite era of history?
I don't. I keep finding I have new eras that I'm interested in. I would say like if I were to pick, I would pick like pre-civilization. So like folks generally, archaeologists would say that civilization started 6,500 years ago. I do not agree with that. I would say that there are very sophisticated advanced civilization that existed at least during the Ice Age, and anytime between 12 and 24,000 years ago. And if folks want to check out, and we can talk about your recommendation too, if folks want to check out Ancient Apocalypse, it's an interesting 8-part documentary series on Netflix that sort of explores like a lot of interesting evidence that would suggest that we need to rethink.
One? Yeah. Is this What is this
I
thing?
don't know if it's Graham Hancock or not. Look, yeah, it's called Ancient Apocalypse. And he's not an archaeologist, which is very clear as you start watching, because I think there's a lot of friction with that community. But he's a journalist that just asks a lot of questions and meets a lot of experts around the world and showcases a lot of evidence that would suggest there's all the modern civilizations that we, that whether it's the Aztecs, the Egyptians, etc., they worship like the same gods from the, with stories about the same great flood. And there's evidence in some of those places where if you go deeper in the ground, there's modern, what feels like more modern structures beneath the structures we found that existed and predate what we believe to be the original advanced civilizations of 6,500 years ago.
So the big question, does Atlantis exist?
So actually that's an episode. And it's like does Atlantis specifically exist? No, I'm not getting into conspiracy theories here. But I will say that that much of the evidence of our prehistory is under the ocean, is underwater. And there's some really interesting structures that exist not too far off of like southeast from Florida, but there's some things underwater that have been discovered that definitely predate when archaeologists believe civilizations would have the ability to create these kind of structures. So I think why the Atlantis myth, I'll just call it that for now. Why it exists, I think, is because there's enough evidence that would suggest that there's a lot to be discovered underwater. That was once land.
This is my favorite thing I've heard from you. So by far, this is awesome. Clearly we found your next podcast.
Yeah. I would love to talk about this all the time and just get paid for that. Because I would love to just research and like spend a lot of time. It was funny, actually. I would love that you're picking up on it, because and listeners may be like, these guys talking about, but some will be like, this is pretty cool. Yeah, I love history. And,
it's awesome.
It's my wife's pregnant. She, a few weeks left till the due date, and a bit more tired these days. So she'll fall asleep early some nights. And I was naturally inclined to as I was combing through Netflix to watch Ancient Apocalypse, and kind of binged it every night she fell asleep over the course of a few days.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself after, wow, I really do love this stuff. And actually one other, it wasn't a concentration because I didn't meet the requirement to be officially a concentration, but one other type of elective that I took at BU with my brother, who's 19 months younger than me, and he also went to BU. We took archaeology together.
That's awesome.
And it was super cool. Just kind of really, really getting an intensive knowledge transfer on the evolution of the Homo species and sort of what was happening in the world 38,000 years ago, and the commingling in between sort of Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals, and how the Homo sapien species came to be, and the migration patterns of people. It fascinates me, and I just think it's really cool. And then and it's neat because then you kind of travel. I remember going to London and being like, oh, I got to go to the ruins where the Roman Empire stretched. It's just, there's so much history beneath us, and a lot of it's in the ocean. And you look at guys what's the director of it's famous director of Avatar?
James Cameron.
James Cameron. Did you know how fascinated he is with this stuff too? Maybe I have him on a podcast because he's he goes and dives himself. He explores underwater. And that's why I think, I haven't watched Avatar 2 yet. I was a big fan of the first one.
Me either.
But there's a lot to be said about what exists kind of beneath the surface of the world we currently know.
I think he's gone the deepest in the ocean by any human, right?
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's something crazy impressive like that. Yeah.
Zach, just look what we just unlocked out of you right now. This is amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, some people may hear that and they're just like, oh, cool, that guy just is crazy and loves to dive. But I'm the type of person like you are that's why? Why did James Cameron do that? And the why behind that is because he's really fascinated with the prehistory that exists underwater.
Hey, man, it makes you an interesting person. what's the point to this life if we're not exploring these wild fascinations? So
Yeah. Well, like, and honestly, like, I just riffed about my nerding out on history, and it sounds like something we can relate on over time. But sort of like back to your story and a story in particular, I'm excited for you to share kind of fully with me and listeners is some of the work that you've done for Shooting Touch and the work you did in Rwanda and we referenced this earlier in the podcast, but the time you spent with the GOAT, Jackie MacMullan in Rwanda, like how did that all come to be? Because you go and I think I linked to it in the Boston Speaks Up like written post. Like there's the ESPN article Jackie did like has got all the photographies from Chris Cardoza, and it's just like I don't know, it's cool. I'm like proud to like that's like a proud moment, I'm sure in your life, and one that was probably really life-changing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's by far one of the greatest life-changing moments for me has been going to Rwanda. So I'll back it up. It all started when I was video production temp at Reebok once again. A guy named Justin Kittredge hit me up. At the time, the temp or intern was in charge of setting up rolling TVs in conference rooms on top of our editing duties or filming duties. So he called me up and he said, "Hey, I need help setting up an Xbox." So I went up and I set up an Xbox for him and his intern at the time, Dimitri. Shout out to Dimitri, who's he's at Puma now. And I made friends with these guys, and I found out Justin started a basketball nonprofit with his wife, Lindsay, called Shooting Touch. And I started Googling it when I went back to my space, and I found out they were based in Rwanda. And at the time, I was obsessed with documentary filmmaking, and in particular, Vice documentaries. And I would just, I didn't give a shit. I just messaged him back. I was like, "Hey, I really love your nonprofit. Can you send me to Rwanda?" And basically his response in summary was like, "Yes, sure." And that's the type of guy Justin is. He's just super welcoming and willing to help anybody who's willing to just go for it. So a couple of years.
Way to take the shot, by the way. That was great.
Dude,
taking the shot.
I just don't care.
As someone who swung at every single pitch that was thrown during a Red Sox game, I'm not surprised. You're just like, all right, let me take a swing at this one.
I don't know. I always feel, and it's probably like an anxiety or something, but I'm always like, okay, what's the next thing? Like, I don't want to wait around for things to happen. And it's just how I feel. There's not anything in particular I've been doing to develop that feeling. I just always feel that way, and I'm always trying to go after the next thing. Now, at the time, I was just obsessed with Vice. I was watching Vice documentaries in college because I was the male person at my dorm, and it was just time on the computer. I had nothing to do. And, I was obsessed with their one in Liberia, so I became obsessed with Africa. And I had developed these video skills at Reebok, and sorry about that. And I hit him up and he was like, "Yeah, let's go." So a couple years later, we made it actually happen. And that was my first trip. And then I kept going back, and I would shoot stills and video, and I'd make these little documentaries. And it all started with the first video. I went with just Shooting Touch, was a couple of them. And just to quickly summarize Shooting Touch, Shooting Touch uses basketball as a tool to foster education and even gives healthcare to women and children in Rwanda, and then specifically girls in Boston. They build basketball courts right next to health clinics so that they create a community, and that gets these kids in teams to go into that clinic to get tested for HIV, to learn about mosquito nets and malaria prevention. And it just has created this insane community in a small country that's still recovering from the genocide and is still dealing with poverty and all sorts of things that come with a developing nation. So I went over there to start telling those stories. And the first story I told, I came back and I had all the stuff to edit, and I said, "We need a voiceover." And Justin and Lindsay from Shooting Touch were like, "Well, Jackie MacMullan's on our board." And I was like, "Okay, can we get her to do the voiceover?" And they're like, "Yeah." And she did it, and she was amazing. Of course, she's Jackie MacMullan. She's the greatest of all time, and she was amazing. And she was like, "Yeah, I need to go someday to Rwanda." And I was like, "Well, if you go, I'm going to come too." And 5-6 years later, we went, and there, at the time, she was going to Africa to write a story about Cameroon, because Joel Embiid had just come up through Cameroon, and there were a few other players coming up, and ESPN was sending her out there. And she was like, "Well, I really am into shooting touch. I want to go to Rwanda too and tell a story." And Justin and Lindsay said, "Okay, Chris, we want to send you too to capture this whole thing." And Jackie and I quickly became good friends, and we worked together that whole trip. We would film anything. We would film interviews with women about their new passion for basketball. We're talking women in their 40s, even all the way up to their 70s, who just learned the game and are treating basketball as a outlet away from their everyday duties for really the first time in a lot of their lives, to have this fun hour of exercise and health. But really, it was more about community and just hanging out with other women. Rwanda still has a lot of old notions of the role of a man and a woman. So a lot of the things Shooting Touch is doing there is to empower women, to help them break out of those notions. So most of the women are working all day farming and taking care of a lot of kids typically. And then their husbands are expecting them to take care of them when they get home, and can often be pretty cruel in these rural villages. So playing the game of basketball became a little contentious for those families, but more importantly, it became, the passions of all these women. And we went out there and captured it. And Jackie was kind enough to get me to do the stills for her article. And that article has now, spread all throughout the basketball community, and it's still alive. And that's something I'm so blessed to be able to be a part of.
That's cool. What was share your favorite, most interesting story from that trip with Jackie?
So there's a couple, on the lighter side, we were in this village called Rukara, which is in the East Province and very rural. It takes, you're going down miles of dirt road, and it's just kind of quite the adventure. And you get to this court, and there's literally 1,000 kids that play at this court, and it's just crazy. But the whole time, every time we went to a new court, I'd get my camera out, and Jackie would, kind of reporter on the street, and we'd start talking to the camera about what's going on there and something, what had Shooting Touch done there. So we're talking in the middle of the road, and all of a sudden, mid-sentence, we start hearing the bells of a cow, and we started hearing people kind of screaming and running. And what happened was somebody's cow got loose, and without a beat, Jackie just kind of acknowledged it and made a great joke about it. And then I turned my camera, and I have the footage online. I'll have to share it. And we acknowledged it, and we laughed a little bit, and she kept going like a pro, because she's incredible, and just continued on explaining what was happening on the court. And then
that's awesome.
On a little deeper level, what we were doing, and this goes back to a lot of the work I do, even just with brands, is we were doing these intimate interviews. So we would go to homes and sit with women, and Jackie would just have these conversations with them, and I would film it. And, these were pretty heavy interviews, often about surviving the genocide, or sometimes about domestic violence, but then also about basketball. And that's when that's when everybody would light up, and they would riff, and because they're all just lovers of the game, but really just they're all just happy to
lovers of the outlet,
to have the outlet and finally be treated properly, and be able to prove to these husbands sometimes that they're bringing value to their family more. A lot of the times these guys would be like, "Why are you going to play basketball? That's a game. Why aren't you taking care of the kids and cooking me dinner?" And over time, it proved to them there was way more value to that. And, you know, they were able to join this community with Shooting Touch. Some of them brought, which gives you health care, and they brought health care to their home. Health insurance, the whole family gets health insurance through these programs. And they brought a ton of value, and it really proved them wrong. And we got to see that in person. At some points, I even saw it, like Jackie even confronted them and said, look what they're bringing home from the court. This is incredible. And it really was amazing.
That's cool. Is there a future potential collab between you and Jackie to go back to all that B-roll and make a little documentary?
So we've done some stuff already.
Yeah,
definitely. It's always, my work in Rwanda, and in particular Shooting Touch, is by far my greatest career joy and passion. And that now all includes, we're a family, it's a cliche, but we are, and that includes Jackie, that includes a few people who work on the ground in Rwanda and in Boston. And every year we all meet and talk about what stories we want to tell more. I haven't talked to Jackie because the pandemic's been so busy, and she, I think she stepped to the side of ESPN. I'm not totally sure what her, where she is at right now in her career. So, but we're always all open to it. We even were on that trip with Amy Latimer, who is the head of the Garden, the TD Garden. So it was really just this unreal trip of just incredible women who I learned an insane amount from. And to this day, we're all super tight.
Nice. I love that story and all the work that you have done and continue to do, like with Shooting Touch and as it relates to specifically to Rwanda, but it definitely, but it kind of ties back to Boston a little bit too. Like there's stories and change, and as is well documented in recent years, like we got a long ways to go here in America.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that drew me to you early when we were introduced was this work you did in Rwanda, and just some of the shared intentions we have to take a similar approach to documenting and storytelling in Rwanda to Boston and just folks that are from maybe they're from underserved communities, maybe they're from communities where there's inequities between men and women, or there's or just the inequities that exist between different cultures, or just folks that live in different neighborhoods or whatnot. I hope in the future an intention that I have set, and I think we've set together, that I'm sharing with the world, is doing more storytelling, like the storytelling you've done for Shooting Touch, about the causes in Boston, right? And kind of revisiting with a lot of folks I've interacted with on the podcast, whether it's Resilient Coders or Tech for Hood or Hack Diversity and the Dearborn STEM Academy, and going and sort of taking more of a documentary filmmaking approach to highlighting some of the change makers that are responsible for these organizations, but also the individuals, the participants, the folks that deserve better shots and pathways to and opportunities towards different types of success in life. And I look forward to as the years unfold, what a collaboration between us might mean just for Boston storytelling.
There's so many stories just in Boston, and Boston's also one of the greatest world hubs of nonprofits. I think that's because of Harvard and MIT. But it's everywhere. I mean, Partners in Health is based here. Because of my work in Rwanda, I got to learn a lot about them and Paul Farmer and his legacy. And they're all based in Boston. It all comes out of here. It's just endless storytelling about doing good to the world. And that kind of goes back to the small town making a huge footprint on the world. And it's so true. It's so true. And through authentic, just documenting storytelling, it's first an easier approach to doing this, but it's a more genuine, it's often more entertaining and impactful approach.
Yeah, totally. And that sort of begs the question also, where do you see Doza Visuals in 5 years? And like start to paint the ideal canvas of how like the types of projects, like obviously like what kind of team you have, what kind of, but I'm curious, like what kind of things are you working on in an ideal state, and especially vis-a-vis Boston?
Yeah, you know, I think about this a lot right now because this is a huge kind of changing moment in my life in general with the twins. You know, right now it's just myself full time, and then I hire a lot of contractors and assistants. You know, I'm starting to work closely with you guys, which has been a great community outlet for me. And I was kind of writing down my resolutions in 5 years, just ideas. And I really want to create a studio, probably locally down here on the South Shore, that is a combination between my Doza Visuals sort of creative agency, video production and photography with art gallery, you know, with this work in Rwanda, but also other artists. And then I want to input a culinary portion. And obviously that stems back to my pizza shop days.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to be yet, but I've become I've always been obsessed with the culinary world. And I'm just, you know, at this point, I just want to spend my days working, doing something that I just absolutely love. And if I have these opportunities to create these places that could be inspiring to others and maybe even help others too, I'm going to do that. You know, I really feel like if I can, I need to. So I think that's where I'm headed. You know, I'd say in 5 years,
Nice.
we'll have some sort of gallery or something like that. But in terms of clients, I just want to keep telling really authentic stories for clients that more align on my vision. And that is happening. It is happening already. So I'm really grateful for that.
Cool. I'm going to share some intentions back with you. Some that I think are joint, and then like one that is even is like an aspiration that I'm curious if it gels with you for like how I see you in 5 years.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Let's
lay
do
it down.
Let's do it. Well, first on the sort of gallery studio front, I think we've talked about this, like some of what I was up to in Venice Beach. Have I shared with you? So like I had this space with my partner at the time. So it's like a studio space. It's like an art gallery, big like farm, like house doors. Like you could roll a tractor into it, like really cool, funky space. 201 San Juan. Anyone who's been to LA and like those like Soleil bicycles, Main Street, like Venice, like the Venice sign with the Venice lights. It's like a couple blocks from there. It's like downtown Venice. It's this really funky space that has all this crazy energy. The Eagles played some of their early like pop-up shows in LA there. Jack Nicholson owned the building for a while, always making it kind of like this like artist haven. We actually were moving into the build, like moving in like as kind of keepers of the space, because it's not like we weren't a traditional business and we weren't coming in like making office space, but we actually cleared out a room in that essentially like it was like a Venice bedroom crash pad for Jack Nicholson's daughter. And like there was like a bed and all these like family things, and it was crazy. But the space was this big open space, and what we did is we started having this, like we were sort of like awarded the opportunity to, you know, maintain, you know, we paid a lease, but like to be in the structure, one of the things that we were going to do is we were going to foster community. So we started having a Venice variety show, and we called it, we did it like we kind of like in LA, like there's a First Friday where like on Abbot Kinney, which is, it's not the same, but it's kind of like a Newbury Street for like LA. It's in Venice, and it's this whole street. It's like companies pay $15,000 a month for a rent just to like, you know, have their company just be there. So it's kind of like, you know, like Nike Town being on Newbury Street kind of thing. And so like Abbot Kinney has First Friday, and they clear out all the cars, and all these food trucks line up, and it's like a thing. And so we were like, well, what if we did like a First Thursday kind of like event? And we partnered with a local stand-up comedian, and he curated a bunch of stand-up comics. And then we had a few local musicians. And so we had sort of like stage performers. So we had like comedy like show, and it was like emceed by the comedy lead, intermittent like musical acts happening inside. And then we had outside, we had artists like painting and doing things on canvas, like outside the building. We had art displayed inside. This was shortly after Trump was elected, and like there was this artist who was like we partnered with to do like a First Amendment movement, which is just like, we're not trying to take a political stance, but we hope that people use their free speech for good. So it was like it was a First for Good campaign. So we had a huge First Amendment like on canvas, like on the wall of our outside wall of our building. And it's LA 350 days a year. It's not even raining. So like you could just put art on the outside of a building like that. And we had all this spillover in the streets. The dudes next door were like these OG, like virtual reality storytellers. And like they work with some game developers, and they like had some games and VR headsets. So we had people like doing like VR game competitions, like in one corner of the studio. And we just did that like every Thursday for months. And it was so cool. Like people came from all over LA for this. Like people that I had met in Hollywood that ran like Cross Campus, which is this huge like incubator co-working space that the mayor of LA is behind. They're like these huge real estate developers, like super successful and like sweet dudes that live totally across town. Anyone knows LA. It's like not easy to like get from one, borough to the other. They started showing up at the events, and then Snapchat put us on their map when they were showcasing their real estate in town, because Snapchat was in that area. So, and it was just organic. It was just like so I share all that because I too have a vision for like a studio space that's multi-purpose and does involve food and the right kind of like, but even in food standpoint, like it allows more types of small bit. So there's like a component for Bean Trust. If people know like Eric Modell and Bean Trust, it started as like a pop-up coffee shop in Cambridge Innovation Center, and now he's got a brick and mortar here in Beverly, Mass. So it's like partners like maybe Eric, or like the next aspiring like brick and mortar entrepreneurs that have like pizza or coffee or sweet treats, like finding ways for there to be like this kind of co-op like commerce in the front. And then there's like gallery on the wall, because here in Beverly it's like Montserrat College of Arts. So there's like arts like have like installations come in and out and support local artists. And then I have this idea for like the back of the studio, where it's like a little production studio, and local business owners that don't have money, as we discussed, to pay all these exorbitant fees can like fill out the efficient pre-production questionnaire, sign up for a slot, and for like $1,000 can show up, do a 1 hour shoot, and then 1 week later they're delivered a folder of a bunch of rich assets for their website and for all their social marketing for the next year.
That's exactly.
So we should do that on the North and South Shore.
Let's do it. And I have the same theory. Is I've always wanted, and this is pretty much what I do now, is 80% of my work time is spent on commercial stuff, and just for-profit work. And then 20% tends to be for nonprofit work, usually shooting touch. And that time, I'm not making money off of that. And that's what I want. So as I get going further and grow a larger kind of studio, I want to give nonprofits who are doing great work an opportunity to have these amazing stories be told at a high level, with efficiently as well, to give them these content assets for free. So I'd like to start a little nonprofit section of myself, but it's using Doza visuals to do that for free, but all in the same place. And the reason I say a culinary portion is because I really owe my time at the pizza shop to developing my creative itch, because my parents never told me what I needed to do or how to make a pizza, really. They gave me the basics at the beginning. But I'd have this whole ingredient bar, right? And I'd have a dough ball, and then I could do whatever I wanted 24/7. So really the pizza shop was my creative studio. I was making bizarre pizzas. I made a banana crust pizza once made with confectionery sugar because I screwed up and thought it was flour, but it turns out to be delicious. And that's my goal.
Nice.
I want to just make a space where people can come, and honestly, and a lot just for myself, that the space is so open to creativity that
it's like community hackathon.
Exactly. But then also mentor and show the importance of being a business person on top of that, because no one needs to be a starving artist in 2023.
Yeah.
Art is everywhere. And I want to get rid of that stereotype of the starting artist and selling out and so on. Like, it's bullshit. Like, if you want to be an artist and really be in control, you need to make some money. And you can make money by still doing art and doing your personal projects.
Totally. And one thing I want to bring up too is, like, I gave a pretty succinct overview of like my vision for this model that is like somewhat different, but like really coalesces with yours. And I think that's the beauty of like ideating with partners. And at times I've gotten feedback on like how transparent I am with like business ideas. And like, I would say to anyone, like, do it. Like, someone that hears this, that has the resources to like acquire, like, do it, and then hit me up, and I'll like, I'd love to support it. You know, I have these ideas, but at some point in time, I'm, you know, developing some relationship with real estate developers right now. And it's an interesting group on the North Shore where like, I want to eventually do this. And, you know, I have 5, 10, 20-year goals. And so it fits probably somewhere in the 5 to 10-year range, but I want to do this. If someone can come along to help accelerate it, great. I also think, back to our conversation earlier about like, especially banks, like financial institutions. I mean, at the end of the day, like, money makes the world go around, and people and consumers need to put their money in banks. And it's still like one of the key, you know, look at who the key spenders are on TV, and that'll tell you like who are the markets that like they're resilient during recessions, and they're like, they always need to be on the offensive to, you know, be in front of consumers. Like, so, you know, banks crying poor falls short on me personally. But if I'm a bank, and you look at like a Century, Capital One, like cafes, they do a Capital One. And like, if I'm a bank, this is my strategy for like financial institutions. And there's many, whether it's Fidelity, whether it's Century Bank, whether it's Capital One, whether it's Silicon Valley Bank, whether it's First Republic Bank, all of them. You want to really do an end around the whole market and show up in the community, execute the idea we just talked about on this podcast.
Yeah. It also might help change your perception. Like, you know, my generation doesn't love banks. I mean, so like maybe that'll help.
No, we don't. And Gen Z, I'm talking to young entrepreneurs all the time that are building their own decentralized bank solution on Square. Literally, that's a trend. Like, we don't trust banks.
And of course we don't. It makes sense, you know, we don't. They all failed. Making 2008,
making your bank into a internet cafe for the community isn't enough. Like giving some Wi-Fi and saying like, hey, we sell coffee. It's like, no, like, you're just like, that's not enough. Like, and it's also not cool. And it's like, I see right through that. It
feels like it's pandering, and it feels inauthentic. It's like we're late to the game on when companies started putting free coffee and like booze in their offices. We're going to do it 10 years later and say, oh, maybe you'll come banking with us. And all of that ended up being, you know, a scam, you know? So. Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I don't think I think there's other kinds of organizations, but, you know, think about, you know, the words corporate social responsibility come to mind, CSR. Like, big enterprises have CSR budgets. They need to have their nonprofit initiatives. The way, you know, where you were going with this idea in terms of how there could be a nonprofit component, or like, you know, or a component of like pro bono work for companies that qualify for it. So small businesses that are kind of scraping by, like there's CSR budgets exist, and there's whole business models. I have friends I met out in LA that one created a contest management platform just to address CSR budgets because they need to be deployed every year. And so like, you know, like there's existing pipelines of sort of cash that could, you know, potentially funnel into these kind of business ventures, but also those companies that have those budgets it would stand to reason to maybe consider like setting up. I'll give you an example. One of my buddies, my buddy runs that contest management platform. One of his clients is Cisco. And if you look up the Cisco Global Problem Solver Challenge, it's run and managed by my buddy Anil Rathi, who's an entrepreneur out of the OG incubator space in LA called Idea Lab. A lot of people will know Idea Lab. And the Global Problem Solver Challenge is one of the most recognized like startup competitions globally every year. And think like, so Cisco, like come move downtown Beverly, get a space, set, you know, hit up Servideo and Doza, and like, let's make some magic happen.
There we go. And listen, I just think just like for brands, storytelling in a video format is so powerful that for these nonprofits who are even just starting out, it's invaluable. You know, through the videos I've done for Shooting Touch, for the base in Boston, for a ton of nonprofits, they raise millions of dollars from them. So if we could come up with a way to do that for nonprofits that don't even have funding yet, and that's a wing of, you know, VCL or Doza Visuals, that's part of the goal, I would say. And that there would be no greater joy in my life, for sure.
Yeah, it'd be cool. It's honestly probably like some sort of a joint, like nonprofit, maybe 501c3 that we could do. And I mean, and you know the type of people we, you know, connect with and attract in this world, like my creative director, Tyler Scholl, like he's in it for, you know, it's all about purposeful pursuits and doing good in the world. So I think we have the right folks in place to do. And it's also like the
beauty of the next generation coming up. Like the days of just doing things for money are over, I'd say. Now we all need money and we need to, but there has to be purpose behind everything, unless it just, because then it'll just seem like bullshit if there isn't.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing is there's going to be increasing pressure on companies to like have purpose or have additional causes that they allow their employee base or their consulting base to like support, because I've been fortunate enough to bring on some lovely Gen Zers on VCL's journey, and it's all about about purpose and their appropriate like cavalier and their demands and their appreciation of the value, you know, not just in terms of the talent that they have, but just honestly, like the savvy that they have in terms of like how the consumer mindsets are shifting. So yeah, it's good. It's a good time to be a millennial, because I feel like we understand the past, and we've gone through a lot of interesting evolutions. My daughter was like just effortlessly using my iPhone the other day, and I was like, Mila, I didn't do that for 20 more years from how old you are right now. So it's like it's going to be, but we're going to be really connected to the next generation, and it's going to be a lot of fun. This has been a lot of fun.
Great. We should do it more often.
And we should, another intention I think we have that I share with you, a little idea over email this week, is potentially kicking up a new, like almost podcast channel, new podcast show together. And getting to chat more regularly, which I would love to do. And I think, we'll obviously still we'll still be working together on projects and finding ways to do some purposeful work in the world. But as we end all podcasts, and I'm excited for you to share yours, share your challenge for listeners.
So a quick little background on this. When I started going to Rwanda, this was like the first thing I did after I left Reebok, and I had never really left the country before. So dropping off at like a bus station in the middle of Kigali is a terrifying experience, especially if you think you're a journalist, like I thought at myself, and you start just taking photos, which is not the right thing to do. But you got to make mistakes. But what I started learning is how to properly approach people and properly take their photo with respect, and then follow up with them and get them that photo back. And I think that's super important, especially in different cultures, but really even just here. It's so we're not just taking. It's really always about giving. So my challenge for everybody listening is, and I think this would be very powerful for everyone's just networking ability, but I think it's going to create a beautiful feeling, is take a photo of somebody, anyone on the street, a stranger, hopefully, using your iPhone, and then get their information and follow up with them later on and give them that photo. And I think you'll experience something absolutely beautiful. And, you know, maybe Zach and I can share a video of that happening for me as well. I actually wasn't there, but one of my best images of all time is a portrait of this woman named Sylvine, who is in her mid 60s playing basketball in her kitenge, which is, you know, her African outfit with all these colors. And she's just an unbelievable woman. And I was able to send her portrait back, you know, a year later, and they presented it to her and filmed it. And it's, you know, one of the greatest joys of my life. But on top of that, I try to bring this into my practice on a daily basis. And it really teaches you a lot about business, about relationships, and about being kind to people and reading people. So that's my challenge.
That's cool. That's so cool. And we should bake that in, like a link to that video, if it's on YouTube or whatever, into your like final answer in the written version of this.
I'll cut something up. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Doza, my man, this has been great. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Zach. This is awesome. And it's been really beautiful to get to know you and becoming friends and now creating our new network. You know, as a solo entrepreneur, it gets lonely, but now I don't feel that way when I talk to you, and I don't feel that way when I talk with your team. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you too. Solo entrepreneurs unite, and just come to find out, like, we get quite a group of cohorts and collaborators, you know, with us these days. So happy that we're on the journey together. This has been a blast. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with the community and maybe nerding out on prehistory in the future.
Thanks, Zach.